100 million pounds of waste. This is the massive physical weight of plastic pulled from the water by a single non-profit organization. Why did the disappointment of one teenager while diving spark the largest ocean cleanup campaign in human history? The initial motivation was purely personal, yet it evolved into a global industrial operation. But without a transition from symbolic action to a genuine physical effort, the project would have remained a mere media-driven campaign instead of an environmental milestone. In just over a decade, this initiative has successfully retrieved, sorted, and processed more than 45 million kilograms of plastic from oceans and rivers across the globe. It only looks obvious that a campaign would lose momentum as the scale of the task grows. At first glance, the logistics of cleaning international waters seem insurmountable, but in reality, the operation has not only avoided slowing down, but has actually accelerated over time. One can notice how the specialized retrieval equipment gradually sweeps through the currents, capturing everything from microscopic fragments to massive discarded nets. This is not a symbolic gesture. It is a calculated intervention into the ecosystem. The process is only gaining momentum. Technicians and engineers have pushed the boundaries of human capacity for environmental intervention into an entirely new phase of efficiency. The camera glides along the massive sorting facilities, where every kilogram of debris is meticulously categorized and prepared for final processing. It is visible how the hydraulic systems lift heavy loads of waste from the riverbeds and surface waters with mechanical precision. Everything only gets more complicated as the volume of material increases, yet the infrastructure adapts to the rising demand for waste management. Automated systems and specialized vessels now navigate through river mouths and oceanic gyres to intercept plastic before it can break down further. The equipment moves at a steady pace, ensuring that the collected materials are not lost back into the environment. Transition to the next level of the operation involves the scaling of these technologies across multiple continents simultaneously. The transformation of a singular vision into a massive industrial-scale cleanup demonstrates a significant shift in how humanity manages global waste. From here, the material moves to the next phase of recycling and disposal without haste. Molten plastic is eventually reformed into new products, effectively closing the loop on the waste cycle. The journey of these 45 million kilograms concludes this phase, opening the road to a more systematic restoration of the world's waterways. 1,600,000 square kilometers is the approximate surface area occupied by the Great Pacific Garbage Patch between the coasts of Hawaii and California. Why is this specific region of the Pacific Ocean considered a global environmental trap? It only looks obvious that trash would simply float in one place, but in reality, the convergence of complex ocean currents creates a massive accumulation zone that draws in plastic waste from every corner of the planet. This area is nearly double the size of the state of Texas and 3 times larger than the territory of France. It is visible how the water holds a dense suspension of debris, yet this is not a solid or continuous floating island, as many might imagine. The process is only gaining momentum. One can notice how the structural integrity of the plastic gradually fails under the constant bombardment of ultraviolet radiation and the mechanical abrasion of ocean waves. These physical forces trigger a continuous fragmentation process, breaking down larger items into microplastics of ever smaller dimensions. Everything only gets more complicated when these microscopic particles enter the marine food chain. They are absorbed by plankton at the base of the ecosystem, allowing toxins to bioaccumulate across various trophic levels until they ultimately return to the human body through consumption. In terms of ecological logic, every 12 months of delay in active cleanup translates to future intervention efforts becoming significantly more complex and more costly. But this is just the beginning of the historical context. Humanity has avoided addressing this accumulation for more than 70 years. A timeline that began in the middle of the 20th century, when plastic production first exploded on a global scale. Scientists estimate that while this specific zone represents only 1% of the surface of the world's oceans, it concentrates approximately 1,800 billion pieces of plastic. The total mass of this debris ranges between 79,000 and 100,000 tons. At first glance, the scale seems manageable, but in reality, experts have remained nearly unanimous for decades in their assessment that cleaning this area is a physical impossibility. financial projections for such an undertaking reach into the tens of billions of United States dollars. If traditional cleanup methods involving ships and standard industrial nets were deployed, the operation would likely span thousands of years. The equipment would move slowly across the vast expanse, barely making a dent in the concentrated mass. One can notice how the sheer physical scale and the physics of the currents exceed the capacity of any mechanical solution ever proposed by engineers to date. The problem remains suspended in the water column, growing in complexity as the fragments continue to shrink in size while increasing in total number. The current situation represents a technical challenge of unprecedented proportions, where the material refuses to disappear and instead integrates further into the planetary environment. Thus, the debris remains within the grip of the currents, waiting for a viable method of extraction. 16 years old was the age of Boyan Slat when he began challenging the established scientific consensus regarding marine pollution. Why did a teenager believe he could succeed where global organizations had failed for decades? The motivation did not stem from academic theory, but from a specific physical observation during a diving expedition in Greece in 2011. Slat descended into the Mediterranean waters expecting a vibrant ecosystem, but found a landscape dominated by synthetic waste. Floating plastic bags appeared more frequently than marine life in the water column. One can notice how these polymer sheets drifted in the currents, creating a repetitive and unnatural distortion of the underwater environment. Why can the ocean not simply be cleaned of this debris? For most, such a thought remains a fleeting curiosity, but for Slat, the question transformed into a technical obsession that persisted for years. He bypassed the traditional route of social protest to focus on a rigorous analysis of logistical and financial barriers. He examined why experts deemed the task impossible by calculating fuel costs and mechanical limitations. But this is just the beginning. It only looks obvious that ships should pursue plastic with nets, but in reality, the sheer scale of millions of square kilometers makes that method inefficient. During his research, a concept emerged that utilized the kinetic energy of the environment itself. Instead of active pursuit, Slat proposed fixed, intelligent barriers that would allow natural ocean currents to concentrate the waste into a single collection point. This strategy eliminated the requirement for a massive fleet of vessels and the accompanying consumption of fossil fuels. The process is only gaining momentum as the theory moves into the halls of academia. Slat enrolled at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands to study aerospace engineering while refining his marine collection models. In the fall of 2012, his conceptual framework for the ocean cleanup earned the Top Engineering Design Award. One can notice the transition from a private project to a public platform on October 5, 2012. At 18 years of age, he presented an 11-minute technical briefing titled, "How the Oceans Can Clean Themselves" at a TEDx event. Initially, the presentation remained obscure with only 2,000 views over several months. 528 pages was the exact length of the technical feasibility study published to validate the foundational concepts of the newly established organization. Why did the leadership choose to release such an exhaustive document before seeking large-scale global funding? This massive report, compiled through the collective efforts of approximately 70 scientists and engineers, served as the definitive proof that their theoretical model could function in a real-world environment. It was released on June 3, 2014, acting as the scientific anchor for the public initiative that followed. The crowdfunding campaign launched simultaneously with 30 vessels launched simultaneously in August of 2015 to initiate a mega expedition campaign across the Pacific garbage patch. Why was such a massive fleet deployed for data collection? The mission sought to gather more information in a single push than all scientific research from the previous 40 years combined. This vast accumulation of data immediately overturned many earlier assumptions regarding the nature of the oceanic debris. The expedition revealed that the garbage patch was not a solid mass. It is visible how the plastic forms a soup-like suspension dispersed across an immense area of the ocean surface. The composition of the waste proved equally surprising to the research teams. Fishing nets alone accounted for 46% of the total mass. Furthermore, between 75% and 86% of all plastic originated specifically from offshore fishing activities. But this discovery was just the beginning of the technical struggle. Prototype tests soon exposed serious structural problems that threatened the entire operation. One can notice how air chambers leaked under pressure, while anchoring systems failed to hold against the current. These setbacks demonstrated that the original concept required a far higher level of engineering than the team had anticipated. Because of these persistent challenges, the engineers abandoned the idea of a 100-kilometer seabed-anchored barrier. They replaced the massive fixed structure with free-floating systems approximately 2 kilometers long. These units utilized deep-sea anchors to maintain their position. System 001, nicknamed Wilson, was deployed in 2018 amid high expectations from the global community. It only looks obvious that the system would work, but in reality, major limitations surfaced almost immediately. The equipment gradually failed to maintain an appropriate speed relative to the plastic. Debris would flow into the capture zone and then simply drift back out due to the lack of a speed differential. By the end of 2018, an 18-meter section of the structure broke apart. The failure occurred due to material fatigue at the welded joints, forcing the system to be towed back to Hawaii. It had collected only about 2,000 kilograms of plastic over a period of 4 months. Media coverage turned critical as experts began to voice their doubts. A survey conducted in 2018 found that not a single ocean plastic expert fully supported the project. More than 25% of those surveyed considered the entire endeavor a bad idea. However, the team described this failure as an unplanned learning opportunity. They returned to the drawing board to identify the core mechanical issue. The process was only gaining momentum as the engineers realized the system needed to move more slowly than the plastic to retain it. From this technical insight, System 001B was developed. This iteration was much smaller and equipped with a parachute anchor designed to create constant drag. When launched in 2019, this system successfully captured and retained plastic from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch for the first time in history. One can notice how the mesh even caught microplastics as small as 1 millimeter. This marked the moment of transition from theoretical modeling to real-world proof. The material collected during this phase validated the new engineering direction for future ocean cleanup operations. 1,000 rivers, exactly 1% of the global total, are responsible for 80% of the plastic discharge entering the oceans. Why focus on millions of square kilometers of open water when the source is so concentrated? This fundamental question redirected the entire strategy of the ocean cleanup away from the dispersed consequences toward the high-density entry points where river geometry and flow dynamics allow for maximum efficiency. The Interceptor system emerged from this logic as a fully automated collection platform stationed directly in the current. But this is just the beginning. It only looks obvious to block a river, but in reality, the Interceptor uses a diagonal guiding barrier to harness the water's own kinetic energy. One can notice how the barrier spans the channel without stopping the water, creating a specific trajectory that nudges floating debris toward the intake mouth. The equipment gradually guides the plastic into the main body of the system where a stainless steel conveyor belt rotates ceaselessly. It is visible how the belt lifts the material out of the water to minimize prolonged contact, which prevents clogging and reduces mechanical wear on the mesh. 50,000 to 100,000 kilograms of plastic can be collected by a single interceptor in a 24-hour cycle. The process is only gaining momentum. Operating entirely on solar power, these units function autonomously every day of the week to stop pollution at the source. Transition to the next level. Starting in 2021, the organization scaled up operations by deploying larger and more adaptable platforms, including specialized versions equipped with active propulsion for varying environmental conditions. Resources for this expansion were bolstered by large-scale fundraising campaigns like Team C's, which accelerated the transition from technical blueprints to active deployment. By 2024, the total weight of removed plastic exceeded 15 million kilograms. One can notice the immense scale when single-night collection efforts reached 1,400,000 kilograms in one instance. Everything only gets more complicated. As the pace of extraction reached these unprecedented levels, the focus shifted to the logistics of the recovered waste. Where do these millions of kilograms of plastic go once the conveyor belt lifts them from the river? It seems simple to just discard the material, but in reality, the waste enters a strictly managed processing chain designed to end its environmental life cycle permanently. Immediately following extraction, technicians and automated systems sort the material by polymer type and its specific level of degradation. Plastic that retains its structural integrity is cleaned and reintegrated into the recycling stream to recover what the ocean has not yet destroyed. 80% of the recovered material is typically found to be too contaminated or degraded for standard recycling processes. This non-recyclable portion is instead diverted to energy recovery facilities or managed within controlled systems to ensure it never returns to the water. The camera glides along the sorted piles where the finality of the process becomes clear. Every action is governed by a singular technical principle, the decisive elimination of the waste. The material is ready to move to the next processing phase without haste. Thus ends one of the key stages of global ocean restoration. 45 million kilograms of plastic have been successfully extracted from the global oceans by the end of 2025. This volume serves as a baseline for measuring the tangible success of a project that has deployed 20 interceptors across 9 different nations. Why does intense scientific debate persist despite such measurable quantitative results? It seems simple to view this as a mechanical engineering challenge, but in reality, the operation represents a direct and unprecedented intervention into an open, high-complexity marine ecosystem. The process is only gaining momentum. One line of reasoning posits that large-scale cleanup efforts target only the visible symptoms of a much deeper crisis. This argument suggests that the true root cause remains the unceasing growth of global plastic production and consumption, which continues to outpace current removal capacities. Everything only gets more complicated as the focus shifts toward the ecological structure of the water's surface. Critics frequently highlight the potential for significant ecological impacts within the accumulation zones. These areas are not merely graveyards for debris, but have evolved into habitats for neustonic communities, where organisms live at the air-water interface. Large-scale collection systems could, according to some assessments, result in the accidental capture of these living organisms known as bycatch. For these species, the plastic zones have effectively become a permanent home. But this is just the beginning. The ocean cleanup has countered these concerns by presenting empirical field data from their operations. One can notice how the sorting systems isolate material, revealing that 99.9% of the mass collected is purely plastic waste. Only 0.1% of the total volume consists of accompanying biological organisms. Transition to the next level. Independent ecological assessments reinforce these findings by comparing the relative dangers of intervention versus inaction. The data concludes that the long-term risk posed by the persistent presence of plastic in the food chain far outweighs the localized risks of the cleanup operations themselves. The equipment gradually sweeps through the currents, monitored by a team of over 150 staff members representing 30 different nations. It gets more complex further on. $7.5 billion United States dollars is the estimated total cost required to fully clear the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. This financial commitment is designed to span a period of 10 years to achieve the primary objective. The organization maintains its original target of removing 90% of all floating ocean plastic by the year 2040. What began as a single teenager observing plastic bags in the Mediterranean has transformed into a global industrial operation. For the first time in human history, the scale of intervention matches the scale of the pollution itself. This shift demonstrates that tasks previously labeled as impossible are often just problems waiting for the application of a correct mental and technical framework. The material is ready to move to the next processing phase without haste.